Adam Ellis, writer, cartoonist, BuzzFeed alum. What you are witnessing is the illustration of a cliché. A monster, brought to life by a man who would be unable to contain its power. This modern-day Dr. Frankenstein would soon be tormented by his own creation, and learn that what's done cannot be undone, here on the internet. The year is 2016. Ellis, 29 at the time, has made a modest name for himself at BuzzFeed. His cartoon protagonist, modeled after himself, has become a recognizable figure in the webcomic scene. Those commenting on Ellis's work at the time would praise his distinct style and sense of humor. But most often, they would praise and define Ellis by a single trait. This descriptor would be Ellis's biggest strength and weakness, but for now, it's what would propel him to be one of the most well-known cartoonists on the internet. The fact that Ellis's work became synonymous with relatable was no happy accident. Relatability, as a marketing ploy, has been serious business ever since companies understood the power of going viral, and it likely was a significant factor in BuzzFeed's promotion of Ellis. Jonah Peretti, co-founder and chief executive of BuzzFeed, was perhaps the first to understand this, or at least the first to approach going viral as a science. Before the idea of going viral even existed, Peretti was forming hypotheses on obtaining mass appeal on the internet. In 2001, Peretti forwarded a humorous email chain between him and Nike to his friends. In the thread, Peretti trolled the Nike web store by ordering Zoom XC running shoes with the word sweatshop embroidered on the side. The email chain quickly spread between friends, acquaintances, and then strangers. It went viral. Enraptured by this rapid popularity, Peretti became obsessed with a singular goal: refining the formula for going viral. Before long, Peretti, who at the time was a public school teacher, was approached by Ken Lear for his skills in driving traffic to help found the Huffington Post. When BuzzFeed came about, Peretti had long since refined his hypothesis. He had a working formula for going viral, or creating contagious media as he called it in a 23-point manifesto. Peretti defined contagious media as the kind of media you immediately want to share with all your friends. This requires that you take pleasure in consuming the media, but also pleasure in the social process of passing it on. Peretti stressed that sharing is the only goal for online media, and the sole determinant of a work's success. If people don't share the work with their friends, it is a failure, regardless of the creator, critics, or other elites. It's a cold and calculative view, but fitting for the scientifically minded Peretti. For a project to become contagious, Peretti firmly believed that it needed to be reduced to the simplest form of an idea. Fancy design or extraneous content made media less contagious. Anything inessential constituted a payload that the contagion must drag along as it spreads. The bigger the payload, the more slowly the entire project spreads. The term Peretti was searching for is cognitive fluency, our subjective experience of a mental task's difficulty. Not the actual difficulty, mind you, but the perceived difficulty, something we gather subconsciously in mere milliseconds when presented with an idea. And this perception instills a feeling within us, which we often attribute, mistakenly, to the thing we are thinking about. A simple example would be tipping, something Americans are all too familiar with. The mental task of deciding what to tip can be difficult. The act itself isn't difficult, there are cultural standards for hairdressers, waiters, etc., but given that it's something not set in stone, the perception can be that it's quite difficult because there's so much to consider. Did we leave enough? Am I tipping too much? If I were in a group, how are we splitting this? Now consider being able to opt for the same exact service, but the tip is already included in the price. Most would prefer this option. It's high cognitive fluency versus low cognitive fluency. Like a lot of psychological theories, cognitive fluency sees most of its use in business and marketing. As businesses seek to optimize profits, a lot of thought goes into why people buy the things they do, and furthermore, how can their choices be influenced? Looking at our previous example, we can clearly see that cognitive fluency influences choice, so crafting high cognitive fluency is important for businesses. The two biggest factors constituting cognitive fluency are simplicity and familiarity. Familiar objects require minimal mental effort. There are multiple carved neural pathways already present. And simplicity streamlines understanding. We don't have to pull from multiple areas of our brain. In the roadmap of our mind, simplicity is a singular destination and familiarity is a neural highway. Combined together, they create easy mental tasks. It's helpful to understand all this because it gives perspective on Ellis's work. Ellis being championed as relatable was not a coincidence, but a requirement to fit in at BuzzFeed. By the time Let People Enjoy Things emerged, Ellis had already seen his fair share of criticism. There was dislike for his static characters and predictable punchlines. His work was often derided as low effort. But Ellis was displaying the very traits so fondly admired at BuzzFeed. His simple-to-digest animation, limited variability, and surface-level humor was cognitively fluent. Adam would state in a Reddit AMA that some of his comics never got posted because they didn't fit the narrative of BuzzFeed Hack. Meaning he was certainly aware of what they wanted from him, the mold he was supposed to fit. But Ellis really outdid himself when he published Shh. The comic didn't hurt Adam's popularity, far from it. If at the time you managed to avoid seeing one of his comics, you inevitably would now. It went viral, became a contagious media, but it grew far beyond that. To this day, you can still find the phrase it popularized, "Let people enjoy things," in message boards, on social media posts, and even, if you are so unlucky, in real-life conversation. Our story now is less about Adam Ellis and more about the behemoth that is Let People Enjoy Things. Adam was eclipsed by his own creation and has been largely forgotten in the arguments that the comic spawned. He would go on years later to post a comic called It's Over, in which he takes the notorious comic out in a field and shoots it. No one knows but Ellis if this was to illustrate his frustration in being defined by a single comic from 2016, or if he despises the public conversations that it started. But either way, it was a futile, symbolic gesture in trying to close Pandora's box. He would have been better off drawing Dr. Frankenstein, lying mauled and dying on the floor, while we see the monster walking off into the sunset. Let People Enjoy Things is the perfect meme, because at once it is a simple and familiar idea, while also a defense for simple and familiar ideas, a cognitively fluent defense of the cognitively fluent. To critique the comic, or Ellis or BuzzFeed, is to welcome the same comic as a rebuttal. It is an eject button for those who wish to avoid further discourse, but of course, we will be doing none of that here. There have been countless op-eds, blog posts, and old-fashioned internet arguments about this idea, but it's time to decide. Should we let people enjoy things? Before we dive in, let's get our definitions straight. Semantics play a large role in public debate, and most that I observe quickly devolve into emotion-fueled arguments simply because no one took the time to fully define their point. Let People Enjoy Things has been no different. A particularly hot take on this is that it's an anti-bullying campaign, that letting people enjoy things is giving power to the meek, a line that can be used against haters who are name-calling and deriding others for their preferences. I can see this being a subjective take, but it's far from what let people enjoy things actually means. No one is or should be defending being inconsiderate. If someone is being hateful, it's likely that their opinions on media is the least of our concerns. Likewise, someone lacking tact is not part of this debate. Knowing when and where to have a discussion on media consumption is something you will not learn in this video. Anyone who repeatedly shares their displeasure of a piece of media to those who aren't receptive is lacking social awareness. They do not need to be told, let people enjoy things. They need to be told to improve their social skills. What this debate is about is if it is right to withhold critique because of another's enjoyment. And I believe I can competently show that it is not. And I'll start with what I am dubbing the junk food argument. In a lot of ways, Peretti's success mirrors that of Ray Kroc's, the franchisor of McDonald's. Kroc may not have had his own 23-point manifesto, but their equations for success shared many similarities. For one, he believed in simplicity. A hamburger, meat and bread, is food approaching its simplest form, and such simplicity has mass appeal. Kroc also was obsessed with standardizing. Every hamburger at every McDonald's had to taste exactly the same, and what this did was build familiarity. So Kroc's formula, like Peretti's, was based around the two biggest factors of cognitive fluency. And it worked, as we all know, incredibly well. The junk food argument, in short, is a comparison of media to diet to show that there are levels of quality in media. An argument that there is objectively high and low quality media would not hold up. However, an argument that there is objectively more nutritious media for our brains does. And that's because mental effort is quantifiable, at least in theory. Neural activity, the firing of neurons which constitutes our consciousness, requires energy, ATP, which we get from glucose. So it makes sense then that the more challenging a mental task is, the more energy we use. Studies have not shown significant measures of this, at most small changes in glucose, but the consensus remains. If thoughts require ATP, then more complex thoughts, requiring further connections, require more ATP. Now, calling a piece of media nutritious or good for us is going on the assumption that we want certain improvements. For some, mental effort is not enjoyable in the moment, but it's similar to exercise in the sense that it will make future mental processes easier. That's the whole reason we study for exams. Furthermore, it can help maintain neural pathways and stall things like Alzheimer's. If we can agree on this, then the argument holds that certain media is more nutritious because it strengthens mental processes. On the opposite end, we have media providing nothing but empty calories, junk food, and BuzzFeed can be equated in many ways to fast food, business-wise and nutritionally. As discussed, Kroc and Peretti seem to be of the same mind. BuzzFeed relies on an assembly line-esque model for media, quick and simple ideas packaged the same for familiarity. This is what Ellis noted as the BuzzFeed hack. But this media is nutritionally void. It's crafted to maximize cognitive fluency, so by definition, it's asking for the lowest amount of mental effort possible, striving for minimal ATP consumption. And a mental diet containing too many empty calories will not keep our mind fit. This is actually kind of an old argument, surfacing frequently when discussing what is good for developing minds, often when debating the harm of emerging technologies. In the 80s, it was video games, bemoaned by one critic as cultivating a generation of mindless, ill-tempered adolescents. This argument is timeless, but applying the junk food argument to a medium is silly. It doesn't matter what form your content comes in, it's what it asks of you. Bazinga. I'm not suggesting abstaining from cognitively fluent media. It's a nice treat. I heartedly agree with the millions of consumers who like a good turn-your-brain-off popcorn movie. But if your entire diet consists of turning your brain off, then your brain turns to mush. Diets won't be the same for everyone. We are all challenged differently. An eye-opening experience for one is a predictable yawn fest for another. But that's what nutritious media will do, provide varied individual experiences. Empty calories will not. No one is coming away from young Sheldon with a unique experience.
I'm sorry, I can't accept this.
If the fast food argument hit home for you, great. But if you found it weak and unswaying, then I must go deeper. There is a far more serious gripe with letting people enjoy things, and it's sanctified consumerism. Columnist Dean Buckley wrote an article on Let People Enjoy Things in 2018, and it made a keen observation that it is an expression that presents consumer choice as beyond criticism. It may be reading between the lines a bit, but let people enjoy things, especially how it's used in practice, argues that all objects of our consumption are inherently worthy of our consumption solely because we enjoy consuming them. Shortened, there are no wrong ways to consume if you're deriving pleasure. I know the gut reaction is to agree with this, but the implications are serious. Sanctified consumerism doesn't just protect the consumers, but the producers. If consumer choice is beyond criticism, then manufacturer choice is too. Because critiquing a product's origin may lower consumer enjoyment. And we should all understand this to some extent. Take a very simple example. Chicken nuggets. A beloved comfort food I am willing to bet most of you watching this enjoy and will purchase them in the future. I am also willing to bet that many of those same people are against torturing animals. Now here's where things get tricky. McDonald's, the second largest purchaser of chickens in the world, and arguably the most famous purveyor of nuggies, is needlessly cruel to their chickens, because profits. These poor chickens are given no sunlight, packed beak to beak so close they cannot preen themselves, and genetically plumped to such a degree that their legs shatter under their own mass, leaving them to wallow in a collection of feces. I hope we can agree that this is unnecessary torture. But my final bet is that many of you will continue to eat nuggies regardless, because let people enjoy things. Now, I'm not condemning anyone. I am guilty of this as well. But this should help you see how we all adopt to let people enjoy things if it suits us. We kind of have to. Avoiding all unethical products would be an all-consuming task, and also very expensive. But that doesn't mean we should sanctify all consumption. We should actually be doing the opposite, slowly clearing the minefield so we don't have to tiptoe to protect ourselves from cognitive dissonance. This is possible because consumers dictate the market. They don't have much power individually, but collectively, they decide what lives and what dies. Now, producers only care about profits, but consumer behavior dictates much of that. So optics, what public opinion is, really matters, well, as much as it impacts sales. You'd think this would lead to morally sound business practices, as the watchful masses will boycott should they deem necessary. But no. Instead, due to a lack of consumer intelligence, we get pandering. Lots and lots of pandering. From corporate leviathans who don't stop their malpractices, but simply apply a caring veneer to their abhorrent image. You will suffer. There are many examples of this. It's everywhere you look. Take Disney's progressive, all-inclusive showboating, while ignoring its long history of racism, because it wouldn't be in the best interest of our shareholders. Or Bud Light's Dylan Mulvaney sponsorship, which blew up in their face because they misunderstood who their consumer base was. Now they're playing both sides of the American culture war. I'm not suggesting Disney or Anheuser-Busch have crimes to pay for. It's just a good illustration of corporate pandering. To see how actual crimes are handled, look to the entertainment industry. Someone like Chris Brown is able to maintain consumer support due to the phenomenon of separating the art from the artist. If you can convince your consumers to play dumb to their indirect condemnation of unethical behavior, then profits can be maintained without actually having to do anything. And this philosophy is really used for everything under the sun, like buying a MyPillow because you can still appreciate the product despite its offensive owner. Companies will seek to maximize profit regardless of the harm it creates, and criticism is the only effective action. For proof of concept, just look at how criticism decimated the tobacco industry. In 1954, nearly half of all Americans smoked cigarettes, and as of 2021, that number has shrunk to 11.5%. Once the true nature of cigarettes spread to consumers, once the cool, sexy veneer could no longer hide its image, smoking became stigmatized, deemed unattractive. So much so that smokers actually feel ostracized by society. And in a sense, they're correct. In much of the Western world, it's culturally acceptable to discriminate against smokers. A staggering 79% of women and 66% of men would not date a smoker. And I think that's just fantastic. But we need to have this level of enthusiasm for other products. To ease you into this proposition, consider the widely regarded as evil company, Nestle. No stranger to unethical business practices, Nestle can't seem to stop using child labor, slavery, grossly polluting lands and local populations, strategically pushing their baby formula on naive mothers, creating dependency leading to the deaths of millions, or aggressively acquiring fresh water rights against all of our best interest. If we brought some of that cigarette enthusiasm to the table, not only stop supporting Nestle, but stigmatized those who do, we could stop all these issues, or at least make it harder for them to continue. With loud enough critique, we could reach a point where 89% of people wouldn't date someone who drank Nesquik. So what do we want? Nestle to stop using child labor, or do we want to let people enjoy things? Nestle is an easy argument to make, and rarely what let people enjoy things is referring to. But the argument is the same across the board, even for media. Criticism is quality control, how we set expectations and decide what is inferior and should not propagate. Quick cash grabs on intellectual properties, productions that cut talent to increase their net, artistically bankrupt creations secretly made to hawk a product. These should make you feel insulted. As an audience, maybe you genuinely believe your time and money are worth the slop in the trough. The slop is warm, it's comforting, you enjoy your slop, so won't people please leave you alone? But that begins a slow decline into a sea of media mediocrity. If a studio can sell you slop, it will try to sell you gruel. There will always be more fat to cut, nutrition to water down. Disney is currently showing us what that looks like. An assembly line of content that's watering down existing products and repackaging them as new. You can have your guilty pleasures, but don't believe your consumption is sanctified. Unfortunately, the rabbit hole doesn't end here. There's an even bigger issue with let people enjoy things, larger than empty calories and sanctified consumerism. And for that, we will need to zoom out, take it all in, and notice the much larger trend. A trend of anti-intellectualism. Before you cry reach, remember, let people enjoy things common usage is to shield ideas, practices, or choice from critical thought. And who would want that?
I don't know.
Our minds are constantly bombarded with new information. Information that falls in line with our current beliefs and that which contradicts it. Criticism, or contrary info, can strengthen our beliefs. It forces us to assess their validity and analyze their weaknesses. But should you hold a flimsy belief, one that truly isn't valid, well, that won't hold up well under scrutiny. But the solution to this is quite simple. No, not to update our beliefs, change is scary, but to discourage and suppress critical thought. Right now, across the United States, there are millions of high school students in their senior year, a year leading towards an academic milestone and a hopeful future. But for millions of their parents, it's a torturous year anticipating their child's damnation.
Usually in late summer, early fall, there are Christian parents all over the country that have a lot of anxiety, and there's a reason for that, because many of them have children who are heading off to college, perhaps even for the first time.
A problem seen rarely elsewhere. In America, the fear of college is very real.
It often comes from parents who are about to send their son or daughter off to college for the first time, and they're worried that their student is going to walk away from the church. I think that's a legitimate concern. After all, they're getting a lot of information.
Evangelicals make up somewhere between 14 and 30% of the US population. That's a sprawling estimate, but one thing we do know is that their numbers are declining. Don't get me wrong, evangelicals are a sizable population, a lucrative market and powerful voting bloc. But it is perhaps this decline in believers year over year that propels the frequent calls by evangelical outlets to keep children away from higher education.
The biggest hit happens when they get to our secular colleges and universities, and they just get blasted with secular and political correct views, and their faith in God is viciously attacked.
Found within an academic paper written by Mark Ward, a quote pulled from a nationally syndicated evangelical talk show goes as follows. When a kid goes off to college, you sign up not just for courses, but for a systematic attack on your faith. They come into a classroom, they sit down. Here's the smartest person they've ever met, the professor, who is maybe slighting and belittling Christian beliefs left and right. And if they don't know why they believe what they believe, that makes them very vulnerable to defection. And here's a quote from Professor of Criminology at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, Mike Adams, on what he saw on campus. If your kid comes home from college one day and tells you that your Christian faith is stupid, welcome to the world in which I live. The college environment does that to our kids. It makes good Christian students stupid. And by that I mean it turns them into liberals, atheists, or both. 3 out of 4 Christian kids, that's 75% for those of you who attend UNC Wilmington, abandon the church when they go to college, and only about a third of them return by age 30. In other words, most stay stuck on stupid. These are their words, the words of the evangelicals. Education leads to defection.
College is not an easy place for a Christian to be these days. At big universities, they're going to get bombarded with all kinds of ideas. They're going to get challenged in what they believe.
Learning, not merely memorizing for regurgitation, requires questioning. But that can be dangerous for the ultra-religious, because questioning the Bible is heresy. So evangelicals are sinking big money into shielding their flock from critical thought. Evangelical pastors touch on this idea that information isn't valuable, truth is. Truth is what constitutes the Christian worldview, a reality in which science and fact all align with the teachings of the Bible. A worldview that has been slowly, but purposefully, become entangled with politics to create a cohesive in-group that can shelter itself.
I repeat, America is in the midst of a spiritual awakening and a moral renewal. And with your biblical keynote, I say today, yes, let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream.
Truth is what created the idea of fake news and alternative facts. It's why evangelicals are more likely than any other group to believe in conspiracies. Truth is why the fight for creationism to be acknowledged as a legitimate theory rages on. Because evangelicals simply cannot exist alongside conflicting information. Instead, they build insane theme parks that show Noah filling his ark with dinosaurs. Evangelicals see themselves in a religious crusade against intellectualism. A crusade that is fought by casting doubt on conflicting information.
The lack of a case for evolution is clear, from the fact that no one has ever seen it happen.
Promoting biblical beliefs.
I'm all for helping people who legitimately need help, but people need to go to work, and if they won't work, then neither should they eat. That's what the Bible says.
And when in doubt, isolating, which is why so many evangelicals opt to homeschool their children. Evangelicals have to aggressively reject intellectualism because it undermines their entire belief system. There can be no questioning the Bible, no scrutiny, no critical thought. You simply must believe the Bible is self-authenticating. It is the Word of God, so is therefore inerrant. Which is an argument eerily similar to one we just discussed. Let people enjoy things may be referring to media, personal tastes, and appear to have no connection to classic anti-intellectual religious rhetoric. But the argument is the same argument Christianity uses to assert its validity. Let people enjoy things says, what I enjoy is worthy of enjoyment because I enjoy it. Both are self-authenticating, sanctified beliefs, ideas that defend themselves just by existing. If your beliefs, opinions, or choice of beverage cannot withstand scrutiny, if you need to silence criticism to enjoy what you do, then you got a real problem. Because it sounds like, if you actually examine them, really look at them, you won't enjoy them anymore. I'm not suggesting evangelicals are waging a secret war against intelligent media, but let people enjoy things certainly falls in line with the culture of one of America's biggest demographics. And we shouldn't let someone adopt any cultural belief that silences critical thought.